Thank you all for coming. We are so thrilled to be having this event at Georgetown called the New Era of School Finance, our lead conference this year. Honestly, I'm amazed and thrilled with how many people are coming to a finance event. There was a time when this wasn't the most popular topic, and we're just excited to have you all here. So I'm going to turn it over in a moment here to Dean Ed Montgomery, who is our Dean of the McCourt School of Public Policy, and we're going to get right into it today. We have 3 fun events I hope will be really interesting to all of you, but let's get going so we don't waste too much time. Thanks.
Thanks, Marguerite. I'm grateful to you and Laura at Edgenomics Lab for your hard work on today's event. The McCourt School is thrilled to have you as a partner in today's conversation. I want to welcome everybody again to Georgetown and to the McCourt School of Public Policy's annual LEAD Conference. LEAD stands for Leadership, Evidence, Analysis, and Debate. We think of these as 4 critical components to effective policy-making process, and oftentimes messy process that our faculty work hard to prepare the next generation of policy leaders we're training here at the McCourt School for, so that they'll be able to master and hopefully even improve the current sausage making. One of the goals we had in mind when we hosted our first LEAD event 4 years ago was to be able to showcase cutting-edge research that's happening at the McCourt School and in our research centers. Research like that being done by our colleague Jane Hanaway, who's here. Jane is a pioneer on the use of large data sets, state longitudinal records that she's used to estimate teacher effects on student learning. Using these same data, she's currently focusing on the effects of students' high school experience on their post-secondary and labor market outcomes. Our Nora Gordon, who wasn't able to be here, she's actually teaching at this moment, whose recent Hamilton Project proposals sets out a new formula for an equitable distribution of Title I funds to the highest poverty school districts, and where she discusses the need for communicating existing flexibilities in that law to those who are trying to implement it. Or Bill Gormley, who for the past 15 years has studied the effects of the Tulsa, Oklahoma School Pre-K project. Or a new faculty member who's coming, Tom Toach, who's in the process of creating a center here as well. It is why Marguerite and her team came to us with a host of ideas to host a conversation on how to build strong schools through the complex lens of education finance that we jumped at that chance. The Edgenomics Lab's innovative research into the finance of public education has informed education policy at all levels, federal, state, and local. Marguerite and her team are a great example of what we strive for here at McCourt, using data to inform and positively impact policy both in the U.S. and around the globe. Marguerite, we couldn't be prouder to have you at the McCourt School and to be working with your team on today's event. Let's thank Marguerite. I'm also delighted to welcome and introduce the Honorable Arne Duncan, former Secretary of Education, and Andrew Rotherham of Bellwether Education Partners. In 2013, we were proud to have Secretary Duncan deliver our commencement address while he served as our nation's 9th Secretary of Education. Needless to say, our students found him inspirational then, and I'm thrilled to have him back to return to our campus for today's provocative and important conversation. Arne Duncan served for 7 years as Secretary of Education, and before that spent 7 years as the head of the Chicago Public Schools. He's been the helm of our nation's education system as it struggled to weather the effects of the last recession, and during a lively, to put it mildly, period of national discourse about how to actually improve our schools. We're incredibly fortunate to have him here today to share his thoughts on the future of education under ESSA and to explore the changing role of education finance and to answer your questions. Our conversation this afternoon will be led by Andrew Rotherham, Thank you, Andrew, for coming. He's co-founder and partner of Bellwether Education Partners, a national nonprofit organization working to improve educational innovation and improve educational outcomes for underserved students. He's a prolific writer on all things education policy, and he served as the special assistant to the president for domestic policy during the Clinton administration and as a former member of the Virginia Board of Education. A quick reminder for those of you who are using social media, we have to put this out there, hashtag LEAD 2016 for those of you who are tweeting or whatever the right appropriate phrase is. In any case, with that, I want to thank you all for coming and joining us today and turn it over to Andrew and Secretary Duncan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to see you, Arnie.
Good to be back.
And I just want to echo what the dean said. I mean, I've known Marguerite for a long time now, she's been doing school finance since back before it was cool, and before you had these big debates that we're having now about it that we're going to talk about today, and it's incredible to see what she's built. So when she asks me to do something, I always say yes. About a third of the time, it actually involves fishing, but I always say yes because the other 2/3 are always interesting, and I think this will be very much. We're going to have a conversation, and then there's floating mics that you will see, and so we want to bring you all into the conversation as well, so definitely be thinking about your questions. Arnie, I just want to start, just not everybody's even familiar with what you're doing now that you've left Washington back in Chicago. Do you want to just quickly share just a little bit about how you're spending your time, your project in Chicago around youth violence?
I'm sleeping more and hanging out with my family more, which has been fantastic. And just quickly, I want to thank Marguerite as well. Her work has really informed my thinking both in Chicago and DC. So having someone this smart working these issues is so helpful. So thank you so much. So it's been an interesting time going home. I really missed the work here. I missed the team. It was absolutely the right time to go home for my family, for my wife and 2 kids. And on one hand, it's fantastic to be back home. It's also a very, very tough time in Chicago right now and huge levels of violence and challenges that many of you are probably aware of. And so what I'm working on, and no guarantee of success at all, is Laurene Powell Jobs, Steve Jobs' widow, has been kind enough basically to fund me to set up the Chicago office of the Emerson nonprofit. And what I'm going to try and do is very directly attack the issue of homicides, of gun violence. It's very much tied to young men being disconnected from school and from work, staggering levels of violence right now. We're on track to have more than 600 murders this year in Chicago in the neighborhoods where I grew up playing basketball. My son's now playing now on the South and West Sides. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel stable. Huge amounts of fear, mistrust, and animosity and anger. And at the end of the day, my gut feeling is that the gangs in many of these neighborhoods have a monopoly. No one else is hiring. And while it may be hard for folks in a room like this to understand, many young men are making rational choices because there are no other choices. So if we can create jobs, if we can help with social emotional support and trauma support, I want to compete with the gangs. And I want to see if we can create a massive number of jobs for young men and give them a chance to eat and pay their rent and support their children in the legal economy.
That's great. That's excellent. I don't know anyone who wouldn't wish you well with that. Speaking of your time here, though, wait, tell us just candidly, what do you miss the most about being here, and what do you miss the least?
Candidly, I always got to be candid. You know me well enough, Andy. I love the policy. I love working with kids. I don't like politics. I'm not a big fan of that. Time spent on debates that have very little to do with helping children and helping minority children, helping poor children, English language learners. I don't miss the silliness in Congress. I don't miss the dysfunction. I do miss, there's an amazing team of folks. It's a chance to have national impact and to work on these issues. And for me, starting off and working at 46 in Greenwood in one corner in the south side of Chicago to leading Chicago Public Schools to be able to play nationally, never thought that was possible. That wasn't some dream or aspiration, just sort of happened. So I missed that. So that was the fun part. The politics I don't miss at all.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. There's a lot of politics. A lot of people were surprised, speaking of politics, that the ESSA bill got done, and that we're not talking about what the next Congress might do on an ESEA bill, but there's actually one that's being implemented right now. When you think about that law, what do you see as both the biggest victories in it, and then the things you're most concerned about, and then we'll turn specifically to its finance provisions?
Yeah. So I was thrilled to see it get done. And no bill is perfect, and none of us would have written exactly as it was written. That's the sausage making that we heard about earlier. But I think it was a lot more good than bad. And at the end of the day, I lived on the other side of No Child Left Behind for 7 years running Chicago Public Schools. So the good part of No Child Left Behind was the focus on disaggregating data, highlighting, exposing achievement gaps, not sweeping it under the rug. The bad part was I thought the law, and this was, I think, unintentional, but it was very loose on goals. So 50 different states, 50 different standards, but very tight, very prescriptive on how to hit those standards. And I was told the story that I came to DC with lots of trepidation. The Department of Education wasn't always my friend in Chicago. I remember sitting in the conference room and debating with the then Secretary Spellings, who was telling me in Chicago that we couldn't tutor 25,000 of our kids after school who wanted more help, who were living in poverty and wanted a chance to do more. To Secretary Spelling's great credit, she looked at our data and gave us the right to do that. But the fact that I had to fight the Department of Education to tutor my kids never made any sense to me. What we pushed very hard for while we were in DC was to be tight on goals, high standards for everybody, college and career ready. Don't back down on that, but give a lot more flexibility for states and districts and schools to hit those higher goals and to try and micromanage Wyoming and California and a Native American reservation from DC. That would be the height of arrogance. And so what we got in the law was states have to have high standards. I think that's a huge breakthrough, something governors were talking about in the 90s, that lots of talk but no action. And so I think there are pretty significant breakthroughs. Let's hold people accountable to a high bar, but give them a lot more room to be flexible and to be innovative to hit that higher bar. So getting too tight on goals, loose on means, I think philosophically was a big step in the right direction. We fought hard to get early childhood education in there. That was a big stretch, but I think everyone here knows, learning doesn't start at 5 at kindergarten. And we pushed very, very hard. For the first time, there's an acknowledgement that learning actually begins at birth, and we got to start to prepare our kids then to be successful. So again, not everything's perfect, but one, a lot more good than bad. Two, it's just great to get it done. And as you know so well, going through the waiver process to give states flexibility for No Child Left Behind, that was never our plan A. That was just plan B because Congress was so dysfunctional. NCLB was broken, but Congress was also broken. And to live with that not quite clarity, for states, for districts, or us in Washington, to have a clear law, and let's work on implementing it. And the final thing I'll say is that the world is changing so fast, and No Child Left Behind was, whatever it was, 7 or 8 years out of date by the time they finally fixed it. This law, Congress can't wait again 10 or 12 years for it to be fixed, to reauthorize again. We can take parts of it. We're going to make mistakes in it, learn, iterate, get better. But the NCLB was like pre-Facebook, pre-Google. The world's different. For Congress to move so slow, they're moving on Congress time, not on kids' time, and we need to sort of work on that piece of it.
Do you worry? I mean, we've seen a big push, and I want to talk about productivity. We're not there yet, but some of that is the accountability, however blunt it was, has definitely put some pressure on the system, and there was responses. And even since the law has been passed, you're starting to see some states back away on accountability. And I mean, you can sort of see, and you can argue that's good. Now we're not micromanaging. That's tight loose, or you can argue it's actually going to take the pressure off.
Right.
Do you worry that the new law, the upside is there's a lot more flexibility for people to do cool stuff? The downside is there's a lot more flexibility for people to do nothing or worse, and that we're going to see some real unevenness, and it's going to, for like the people in this room who are interested in the push on finance, it's going to really sort of take the foot off the gas?
Both those possibilities are very real. So I think you'll see some innovation and creativity and great work that was hindered by the prescriptiveness of No Child Left Behind. And yes, there will be political pressure from both the left and the right in places to scale back and do less and accept a status quo, which I think is mediocre. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us. It's incumbent upon the media and newspapers. It's incumbent upon the civil rights community to call these things out. And the thing, Andy, as you know, I always talked about, under No Child Left Behind, again, great goals, a great idea, but about 20 states reduced their standards under No Child Left Behind to make politicians look good. And one of those states was Illinois, where I lived and worked. And when that happened, no one said a peep. It was deafening silence. And so everyone got a pass on that. So if a state or if a district starts to slip now, hopefully there's a transparency and an awareness where they'll be called to the carpet. And we have to make things very uncomfortable in those situations. So yes, there are fewer maybe guardrails, that's the risk in the law, but there's, I think, a court of public opinion and a moral authority and a commitment to equity and a fight for civil rights that's tied up into education funding, that my strong hope is that moral leadership will challenge folks who want to step back and say, we don't care about the performance of poor kids or English language learners or special needs kids or black children or Hispanic children, Native American children. We need to challenge that, all of us, you and I and all of us, of everything we have.
So what about the finance aspects of the law? What are you most excited about? There's a number of provisions put in related to school finance, some of which actually based on some of the work Marguerite's done, and there was a lot of, that was one of these things that's been kind of going on behind the scenes for a while and made into the law. So what are you excited about there, and what do you see as the risks with finance?
Well, I'll start when you start talking about the supplement, not supplant, piece of it. And again,
we're going to get to that and comparability.
Okay, yeah, so get to all the good stuff. So again, at the end of the day, for any of us in Washington to say, this is how a school district or a school in Wyoming should spend their money, or in inner city Chicago, or in Alaska should spend their money, it doesn't quite make sense to me. And as a teacher, as a principal, as a school superintendent, I would resent that. If we are holding them accountable to a high bar, and if there is transparency, and if student achievement is improving, and we should always tie this back to student, it's not just how you spend money, it's impacting kids' lives. If we are getting results, we should be very, very good with how they're doing that. If they're not getting results, we need to sort of step in. And I always think we should focus on finance and budget, but I always sort of say there are 5 pillars, and budget's just one of them. First, there has to be an evidence base. And so much of the spend we do in education has little to no evidence base. So you have to start with where the facts lead us. And sometimes the facts lead us to places that are politically difficult. But if it's right for kids, we owe it to them to follow the facts. Secondly, once you have the facts, you have to have a strategy or a theory of change. Every school district has 50 different issues, and you can't work on all 50. What are the 2 or 3 or 4 this budget year or the next 3 or 5 years that we're going to focus on? Third is then, okay, you put budget, you put your resources behind that strategy. Then you have to look at implementation, and then you have to look at feedback, and then make continuous improvements. So budget is important, but is one step, and I would argue like the 3rd step in this process. If we start with budget, don't think about facts, don't think about strategy, we're not going to get to where we need to go.
But that sounds to me, when you were saying, so if they're getting results, which leave motion, I can almost hear if Senator Alexander was here, I could hear him saying that. But there's obviously a big debate has now broken out about sort of how that aspect should. So how much should we dictate from Washington how this stuff's reported? I mean, basically, who's right in this dispute that's broken out between the administration and Alexander about how much authority the department should have to actually say you need to report these specific ways?
Of course, the administration's right. So let me be clear. You should absolutely report all of these things. You should have absolute transparency. We need to have clear, I think there's so much opaqueness in school finance. If you ask, forget the public or teachers, if you ask, or public or parents, ask teachers in their own school. I used to do this all the time. How is your budget spent at your school? What are your dollars for professional development, for your own growth? They can't tell you. They don't have a clue. And so the lack of transparency, the absolute opaqueness of school finance is part of why I think we're not getting better as fast as we should. So we can walk through the details of whatever. Now, we should report, again, that's just transparency. Then we got to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. Who's accelerating the learning for inner city kids? Who's accelerating college going for rural kids? Who's helping more Native American kids be successful? Who is and who is not? And then what do we do to challenge those who are not? But to say somehow we shouldn't report or we shouldn't know how folks are spending resources, you have a moral, a financial, and educational obligation to have absolute clarity on all those things. And I would argue not just to the state or to the federal government, to the community, to parents. This is something, if I would have been smart as a CEO, a lot more just public budget hearings. Here are the 3 things we're focusing on this year. Let's have a debate. I love student voice. Have our high school students engage them in a conversation. How do they think? Middle school students, how should we be spending our money? This should be a public dialogue, and that's messy, as we heard about, and more complicated. I think it makes it smarter. I think it builds trust. I think it holds us all publicly accountable. And to anyone to sort of walk away and say those things aren't important, I don't understand that.
So we have the situation, though, we have, and this is where the rub gets tricky. So should we, reporting, under the law, you have to report your actual teacher salaries, but should we be requiring money to be allocated based on actual salaries or average salaries? These are the things where you've got these historical resource disparities. We know they exist. They're well documented. Yeah. So on the one hand, people say still local control, and if a school's getting results, leave them be. Other people say, we've got these resources. It's a civil rights issue. like where do we draw the how do we balance flexibility with what we know are sort of basically really historically discriminative practices?
Yeah, so I think so many of debates in education, these false dichotomies, and I don't see a debate here. I think you give local flexibility, but again, you have accountability for results and absolute transparency. If you somehow say we should not report teacher salaries at the school level, what is 85% of school budgets, 90% are what? They're teacher salaries. So are we going to report on 10% of a school's budget? That's what company, what Fortune 500 company would report on 5% of their expenses or 5%, 10% of their earnings? You wouldn't do it. And the fact of the matter is, it is uncomfortable, it may be unpopular, it is controversial, but the fact of the matter is that when teacher salaries are such a huge percent of school spending, in the vast majority of schools that serve poor kids, they often have more inexperienced, less highly paid teachers because we don't pay for working in tough communities. We should talk about that. And so poor kids are actually getting less spent on them each year than kids in wealthier schools. And if you think about the cumulative impact of that, pre-K, kindergarten, first through 13, 14 years, that has a devastating impact on poor kids. And to say somehow because we've never done it, we can't talk about that now, that's why we have these massive achievement gaps. That's why we have such a lack of social mobility and income inequality in our nation, because we have not taken seriously that obligation. And so to say somehow that is off the table because it's been off the table for the past 5 decades, really? I don't buy that. I don't buy it.
So switching local.
And let me just keep, this is
Yeah.
this is an important point. Because if you have that conversation and that level of transparency, it forces the next level of conversation. So I've traveled the country, I keep asking 15,000 school districts, find me one school district that systemically identifies their hardest working, their most successful, most committed teachers and principals and moves them to the hardest to serve communities, to the most disadvantaged kids. And this is the supposed genius of local control, is you have all this local innovation, there's some of that. But there's not one school district, not one in 15,000 that at scale, a couple do some interesting things, Charlotte Mecklenburg does some interesting things, but not one does it. And to be very clear, I'm saying if you're teaching in a 99% minority, 90% poor school, and in a district you also have a school that's 90% white and 90% affluent, I would argue that job is a much tougher job. Every teaching job is hard, but that job is a much tougher job. And we need to pay those teachers more, we need to pay those principals more, we need to give them more resources, more counselors, more social workers. So if you have the first debate in transparency, it forces you to behave in different ways. So my hometown of Chicago, right now on the south and west sides, it is extraordinarily difficult, violent. We had one high school that had 4 kids just killed over the summer before the school year started. That job is very different than teaching at Whitney Young or Northside College Prep. And so to say that every teaching job is the same in Chicago, I reject that. And so you can't get to thinking about how you allocate not just dollars, but human talent and technology if you don't have transparency on the first. And it forces things that are politically unpopular, left and right. It is hard and uncontroversial. But if we think great teachers make a difference in kids' lives, if we think every great school has a great principal, if we think our most disadvantaged have to have this to break cycles of poverty, and the fact that not one school district does it, we should be very ashamed. We should be very uncomfortable with where we are. And I think this conversation can force a series of policy debates that will move us to a very different place. So this for me is a gateway. It's not the end. It's a means to an end to think about what are we really doing to give kids who come from a tough background a chance in life.
But the field remains incredibly resistant, even to ideas like differential pay. We have sort of small difference, but sort of really radically differentiating pay and thinking about the kind of thing you're talking about. So like, what do we do? You talked earlier about the moral outrage, but there's been moral outrage about this for a long time. These are not new. The disparities they're being documented in a more granular way, but these are not things that people who analyze the field weren't aware of. So how do we connect the dots between, so if we're going to say we're not going to push you from the federal level, we're going to leave it to the states, like what do, as a community, and particularly as finance researchers, what do you have to do to like turn that moral outrage into actual action?
So first, obviously, collectively, and I put myself at the top of this list, collectively, we've failed in this. I mean, none of us get anything higher than a D-. I mean, that's just the fact. The fact that so few have moved, we all have to own that I think, again, I'll go back, because it is so opaque, if you ask most parents, you know, if you ask most teachers, do you know that your school in the inner city gets a third less resources than the school, you know, in the same district in a wealthier part of the town? They'd be stunned. They would have no idea. And so I think the push has got to be less, yes, we need the research, we need the data. This is really empowering parents and community groups to demand change. And I think this idea of doing it from the top is very difficult, if not impossible. This is movement building. This is movement building. And I think it's really having folks in communities understand how much their kids and their communities are being shortchanged. People don't really know. They have a sense, but they don't know the numbers.
Well, let me ask you then a political question. So if
Yeah.
I said, so you said you didn't like politics, I get that, but I'm going to ask you a political question.
Yeah.
So in this campaign, we have a candidate, you know, sort of right now we've got a situation like in New York where the Attorney General is trying to get corporations so they can't say certain things about warming. So and a lot of people are cheering that, like, you know, don't let them say certain things about climate. We've got a candidate in the Democratic primary who wants to lock up every third banker, if not take them out back and shoot them. And yet we've got this system where you just said we all should get a D-. I wouldn't disagree with that. But yet it hasn't permeated our politics at all to, like, why aren't people equally outraged about that this institution, it's every bit a threat to social mobility as these other things.
So that's, again, what's been debated in the debates is what people vote on. And people don't vote on education. And again, I could care less, Republican, Democrat, left, right. The biggest thing we could do to change the nation is that if every voter, not just every parent, every citizen voted around early childhood, K-12, higher ed policy, if that was one of their top 3 issues, our country would change overnight. Wouldn't matter who was in office. And the fact that no one votes along these issues, every politician gets a pass. They all visit schools, they all love photo ops, they all kiss babies. Almost none of them walk the walk on either party. And again, I don't blame them. I really blame us and voters. And until this is part of who we're voting, again, Republican, Democrat, Conservative, Liberal, that's actually, frankly, irrelevant to me. What is their policy in terms of increasing access for early childhood education, which I think is the best investment we can make? What are we doing? High school graduation rates are at all-time highs, but still not nearly high enough. What are we doing to drive high school graduation rates to 100% and eradicate dropout factories? College graduation rates, we're 12th, 13th in the world. Nowhere near it. So on every level, what's our goal to lead the world in college completion rates? Every politician should be on record for their goals on each of those. And then let's have a very vigorous debate around strategies, the means to get there. And that's very healthy, and no one has a monopoly on good ideas. But any of the leading candidates, what's their early childhood goal? What's their high school completion goal? What's their college completion goal? What's their strategy to get there? Nobody here in this room knows. This is a pretty smart room because we haven't asked them. We haven't put that stuff out there. And that's on us. That's not on them. That's on us as voters.
So taking it down, you talked a little bit earlier, Chicago. So Chicago's a fascinating situation. You've got this enormous overhang caused by the pensions. You've got, which there's plenty of blame to go around. You've got state finance issues. How do you untangle from a finance perspective? Is the answer some kind of a state takeover? Is the answer some kind of a grand bargain? How do we, in the teachers union, there was a strike. My kids want to go there because they think nobody has to go to school there. Yeah. They've been lobbying me to move to Chicago because every Friday they seem to be off. So how do you unwind, and this is less of a federal issue, it's a state issue, but it's a place you know well. From a finance perspective, how do you unwind a situation like that?
Again, let's get past the headlines and let's get to the facts. The fact is Illinois is one of the states with the greatest disparities in funding for education. So you have some districts in Illinois that are getting about $7,000 per child. You got some that are getting $22,000 per child, 3 times as much money. And when I ran the Chicago public schools, my district was 90% poor, was 85% minority. We received less than half the money each year than school districts 4 or 5 miles north of us along Lake Michigan, Wilmette and Winnetka, which are extraordinarily affluent. So again, the kids who need the most help get the least structurally. People don't know this. We actually sued the state due to the inequitable fundings. We lost that suit. But the system is broken. The system is rigged against poor kids. When you have a property tax-based system and your property values are worth less, is that the kid's fault for where they're born? It's not. But they paid a price every single year in their education. So you have a system that is broken, that is rigged to the wealthy, not the poor. And Chicago's not the least well-funded. You go to some of the southern suburbs, Robbins and Harvey, and it's devastating, devastating. So that's one. Secondly, it gets a little technical, but you have a pension system where Chicago taxpayers pay separately for Chicago teachers and contribute to the state pension. No one else in the state does it. So the base funding is broken, the pension system is broken. Then you wonder why it doesn't work. Well, it's structurally set up to fail. Right. So take all the other stuff off the plate. You have two options. Again, hard politically. One is you raise the level of funding for every district. Or two, you have to play a little bit of Robin Hood. You have to take from the rich and give to the poor. And that's very hard to do. Doesn't happen often. Jerry Wiest, when he ran the Montgomery County schools here, did that. And it takes a lot of political effort, and it takes a hell of a lot of courage, but guess what? It had extraordinary results for kids. And short of that, everything else is politics. Everything else is window dressing. You have a broken system that disadvantages the kids who need the most help educationally. It is indefensible. It's been indefensible forever. And unless you address that, everything else exacerbates it.
Will the union go along with that deal, though? They seem to see this as their point of maximum leverage right now.
Well, I think the biggest, again, the sadness for me as someone who is a Chicago boy is that Chicago needs to have a united front on this, because Chicago kids are just being destroyed and have been for decades, frankly. And Chicago needs to unite labor and management, the business community, and parents, a united front to Springfield, and not just to fight for Chicago, but fight for other underfunded districts. And because Chicago's at each other's throats and is so dysfunctional, they're fighting over crumbs. It's so heartbreaking for me to see, because it's like they don't see the bigger picture. So they're fighting over just literal crumbs when the pie is in Springfield with the state legislature saying, let's do the right thing for everybody. And again, it's like, the ESSA bill, labor and management are never going to agree on everything, but if they fix the state funding, so many of the issues would go away. But because Chicago looks and is, frankly, so dysfunctional right now, it sort of gives Springfield a pass to say, why should we give them more money? They're fighting. It doesn't make any sense. And so in life, you got to pick your battles. And there's so much picking the wrong internal battle now. And it's like a circular firing squad. They're killing off each other. And kids lose when that happens.
So I want to bring in the audience one more question. To Chicago, you mentioned the pension, and they made a finance deal that was in their interest at the time, but has ceased to be a good deal with this pension payment structure you talk about. So they're now paying twice, and it's created this huge overhang, which is a big part of this. You see this in places like Detroit, and these are sort of the canaries in the mine shaft. Elsewhere, the unfunded liabilities are more manageable, so they don't necessarily get headlines. But pensions, it gets very little attention, and we talk about lots of other finance. We talk about lots of other finance questions, but this is a huge one. I mean, just structurally, with the dollars involved, and you're seeing school districts start to give an increasing % of their operating budget to people who aren't actually working. Right. How do we get more attention on that? How do you unwind that problem?
Again, you're an expert. You're a pro. Marguerite is. 99.9% of the general public would have no idea on these issues. So I do think for folks working on this, putting out data, putting out facts, putting out information, having transparency, starting a conversation. The solutions are complicated. It's not easy, but you can't start to solve them if people aren't even focused on it. And so I do think this is an area you've done a great job, and others, of just starting a public conversation. This is what, this is the % of operating budget. This is the cost per child. This is what's going on going forward. And again, if you surveyed parents, teachers themselves, the public, they would have no idea. So more light, more transparency, more information, I think, is really important. I want to go back to just sort of, for me, the central challenge for me in education is I can make a pretty compelling case as a nation. I think we underinvest in early childhood education. I think we underinvest K-12. We underinvest in higher ed. Not everyone might agree with that. But if we're going to ask taxpayers for another nickel, we have to be getting results. We have to be held accountable. And for me, the grand bargain is more resources for more results, for more accountability. And I'll never forget, early on, I went and spoke to a room with a couple thousand early childhood educators. I talked about how this was the best investment we could make, talked about how important it was, talked about my mother's life's work and why it meant so much, and rah, 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 rah. And then I said, well, we got to talk about whether students are ready to enter kindergarten, hold ourselves accountable. And the room got dead quiet and just silence. And we can't ask, again, I don't care about people's politics, we can't ask people for more money out of their paychecks if we're not willing to say, yes, early childhood should, and we can figure out how to measure it. Children who have great early childhood experiences should be more ready to be successful, not just academically, but socially and emotionally in kindergarten. If we're gonna pay great teachers a lot more money, we should have higher graduation rates and less kids needing remedial classes going to college. If we're gonna make, the goal for me is not, college more affordable, yes, that would be good. We gotta increase completion rates. And if we're not willing at any level, early childhood, K to 12, higher ed, to talk about outcomes, to talk about results, it's a pretty hard case to make the taxpayers to ask for more money.
I would agree with most of that. I think, I'm not sure here you can say we're underfunding the nation's B schools. This place is pretty sweet.
I agree.
So,
I bet that's largely private, but that's a different story.
if you've got a question, get your hand up so the mic runners can find you, signal to them. Arnie, what's the role of the media here? Because, I mean, so the Chicago situation, there was a story on CBS Radio this weekend that was fascinating. It said that there's been a fact finder's report and the union disagrees with it. And then it was 25 seconds of Karen Lewis saying, like, making an impassioned case, not unlike the case you just made, we have to fund our schools. I mean, I was ready to go protest. But the story said nothing about, like, what did the fact finders find? So it was a very emotional story, but there was absolutely no, you were left, if you didn't follow it, you would have had no idea what did the fact finders find, except you could kind of infer the union didn't like it. And so they're talking about, like, so what's the role of the media in sort of getting to more, we seem to be very addicted to the noise, getting to more signal.
Right, so that's the issue. That's the issue, I don't have the answer to it. I do think obviously the media is much different than the media was 5 or 10 years ago. The media is much more diffuse, and as you said, the media loves the noise, they love the controversy. The harder thing are the facts and the long-term story. I always thought one of the stories that I felt was underreported when I was here was the school turnaround work, which was imperfect, but saw some real progress. But because, thankfully, people weren't yelling and screaming at each other, somehow this pretty radical work didn't get, I think, nearly as much attention as it should have. And so the question is whether it's traditional media or new media or online media, social media, can folks start to look at these issues systemically? And again, whether it's written pieces, whether it's TV pieces, long form, short form, what's the history of funding in Illinois? And this crisis today has been decades in the making, and we have to sort of understand that history. DC here was pretty dysfunctional for a long, long time. Dysfunctional, corrupt, and frankly had a huge amount of money per pupil. I would have died when I was in Chicago to have as much per pupil funding as they had in DC. DC is doing some things very, very differently now and getting some very good results. Not perfect, heck of a long way to go, but what's that story? What changed? It's never just about money. Something changed around strategy and thoughtfulness and vision and integrity. And I just think there's so many, for me, there's so many fascinating stories that go underreported because it's not so-and-so yelling at so-and-so about whatever the headline of the day is. And I don't have an easy answer, but there's such a critical role that's missing. There's a void there that folks could sort of step into to tell the long story, unvarnished, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here's why we are where we are. Here are 3 options of where to go. So I think the storytelling is a big piece of it, but I keep going back. Without the political will, without the demand, without the push on both sides, I think we'll continue to get better at a rate that is insufficient. The constant critique, Andy, I got was that we were moving too fast. I think we were moving way too slow, way too slow. And I wish when I was running Chicago or running here, I wish parents were knocking down my door saying, Arnie, my schools are not getting better fast enough. What the hell are you going to do? And we never get that pressure. And until parents are banging down our doors, demanding more, we'll continue to putter along. And the kids from affluent families will do pretty well, and the kids from non-affluent families will struggle. And the final thing I'll say is obviously the economy has changed, and the cost for a lack of educating poor young people and our minority students, the cost socially, economically, civically to our democracy is massive. When I was growing up in Chicago, if my friends drop out of high school, they could work in stockyards and steel mills. It wasn't fantastic, but they could have a pretty good life and support their family and be part of society. Those jobs are gone and they're not coming back. If you don't have at least a high school diploma and some form of training, you don't have a chance today. You don't have a chance. So the world has changed. In education, we're just still going along like this. So how do we create the demand to accelerate the pace of change? That, at the end of the day, I think is what we'll that's the genie we need to find.
Do you have some questions, Lucretia? Do you have someone? Did I see? Great. Mike Petrilli.
All right, Mike Petrilli at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary.
Arnie, no, Mr. Secretary.
All right, Arnie. Well, I'm trying to be respectful of the office. Two quick questions. I'll warn you, they're tough ones.
And Mike's going to model, by the way, sorry to interrupt, Mike's going to model actual questions.
Yes.
Not Washington questions, but actually real ones.
I'll make them real questions. You spoke a lot about acrimony and dysfunction, and you made a statement on the way out of office about how the department's lawyers were smarter than the lawyers of those on the Hill, the Republicans on the Hill. That comment has created a lot of acrimony as the law is starting to be implemented, implying that the Department of Ed was going to try to roll the Hill on the implementation of ESSA. So my first question is, do you want to take that back? Do you want to apologize for that? I personally think that could help a lot with the current environment. The second question is, you talked a lot about the supplement not supplant, as we should do more reporting. I think Lamar Alexander would agree with you that the law requires reporting of actual spending. What it doesn't require is to equalize funding, at least from Washington. And that's the real debate, is whether the department now is trying to mandate that from Washington, even though the Congress debated that. Some of us would have supported if they had done that, but they decided not to do it. And now Secretary King is trying to do it anyway. So do you agree that we should just stop at this point with reporting the data rather than trying to force school districts to equalize funding, because it's just simply not in the law?
Let me take the second one first. So just to be very, very clear, and again, this is a little technical for folks, and you live this at a level, and Andy and others that others don't. Title I money is supposed to be on top of what state and local money is funding, not supplanting it, not replacing it. And the purpose of Title I money is to give more resources to poor schools and poor families and poor kids, because it's more difficult to educate those kids, which I think we can all agree. There are more challenges there. They need more time. They need more support. They need more resources. And the fact of the matter is, 2/3 of kids in Title I schools have less money spent on their education than kids in non-Title I schools in the same district. So that's not happening. It's not happening. And so if we believe it costs more to educate poor kids, if we believe they deserve and need more resources and more time, if we believe the federal Title I, was it $14 billion? Federal Title I money is supposed to be a piece of what's needed there. That's not what's happening. It's not happening in the majority of places around the country. So I think that's unacceptable. I absolutely think that's unacceptable. And, and again, the fact that we still have such massive achievement, if the outcomes are fine, then I could turn away a little bit. But the fact that the outcomes are so horrifically spread, there's so much inequity in outcomes, the fact that there isn't a district out of 15,000 that has closed the achievement gap. Some are doing fantastic work. Some of the charter organizations have done amazing work there. But the fact that not one has done it, somehow we're just going to say, let's just keep doing business as usual when the stakes are so high.
You have to win that fight.
You have to win the fight for kids. You have to win the fight for kids. And right now, what is happening for kids is wrong. It is wrong financially, it's wrong morally, and it's wrong educationally. And my understanding, again, I'm not, John King's got the heavy lift now. My understanding is all the department is doing is asking is take your Title I schools, take the average of your non-Title I schools, and just make sure the average of the non-Title I schools is not higher than the Title I schools. I think that's common sense. I think that's obvious. I would potentially go with a higher bar than that. I don't think that's a heavy lift. And I think it's the right thing to do. So that's, on the second one, happy to apologize, happy to do whatever. Let's get to work. My simple point, you get in trouble in Washington for telling the truth. My simple point is we have a team. It's not about rolling anybody. That's absolutely incorrect. But it's absolutely understanding what our rights and responsibilities are under the law. And whether it's funding early childhood education, or whether it's ESSA, or whether it's fighting not the for-profit industry, but the bad for-profits in the higher ed space in terms of gainful employment, it's important that our legal team be world-class. And we have a world-class legal team. That's the only point I was making. It's not about rolling to anybody. It's about knowing exactly what the facts are, what the law allows us to do. And you know better, we got challenged on many, many things. We won virtually every one of those challenges.
Is this one of these fights, though, that's like you were saying, is this basically about adults, do you think? I mean, essentially, like, is there a counterfactual where if you hadn't made that remark, there'd be a deal getting cut on?
Of course not. It's a smokescreen. It's a course.
So, I mean, well,
my one sentence.
that's what I'm saying. So has this become like a fight that's about adults? They're upset about what you said, and so that's undergirding the fight? Or is there
They might be upset. It's a smokescreen. My one sentence is that important?
That's what I'm saying.
Are you kidding me? Let's be, I talk to the media. I do speeches every day, every place. I don't say everything perfectly. I don't know anyone who does. No, this is asking people to do some hard stuff.
So
And
I guess,
it's a
let me
resistance
ask a
to
question.
that.
Is this dispute, is this about adult politics, or is this actually about?
I think it's a bailout because it's hard for people to deal with the facts. It's hard for. Let me ask a question. Without naming names of senators, how many times do you hear them talk about kids? How many times do you hear them talk about equity? How many times do you hear them talk about African American kids and Latino kids and special needs kids and English language learners? It's all adult drama. And we can have honest debate on lots of things, but where's your heart coming from? What's your true motivation? And I'll say, I doubt the motivations of some.
All right, other questions?
And I'll apologize for that right now when I get in trouble for it. So I said it, and I apologize, but it's the truth.
Oh, Steffi, do you have a question? And then there's a second mic to go to the back. Go ahead while the mic gets, because I don't think the young lady in the back has a mic yet.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. You stand
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry.
Stand up.
I didn't see. Oh, sorry.
Stand up.
Okay, my name is Michelle. I'm an undergraduate at Georgetown. And in regards to apathy in just schooling and transparency, like I personally served as a site council representative at my local high school, and we allocated the budget and we tried to make it transparent and like posted minutes all the time, but just it seemed like no one would care. Like whether it be teachers or students or even parents, no one would really care about where the money went. And I was wondering if you had an answer to tackling that question of apathy.
I don't. That's a hard one. First, I want to say thank you. So don't stop. And I don't have an easy answer for tackling that. Again, it's how do we. So one is the transparency. That's hugely important. The second point, I think, in all this stuff is how do you tell a story? How do you connect to people? Not just obviously budgets are pretty intellectual. You got to connect to people's heads and their minds, but also to their hearts. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, how do we tell better stories behind this stuff that appeal to people emotionally as well. And you look at, I look at this stuff, this for me, I keep going back, this is movement building. And we look at the civil rights movement, you look at the movement for gay marriage. Part of it was intellectual, but a lot of it was visceral, was more heart than head. And so I don't have an easy answer to your question. You're asking the right question, but it's helping people understand what's at stake, what it means for their kids, not just this budget line is $17 and this one's $19.25, but how this changes kids' lives. And I think if people understood that high quality, not just any, but high quality early childhood education has not test score impact, it has 4-decade-long impact on people's lives, that's a different story. And so I think thinking about how we move from numbers, it almost goes back to your media question a little bit, Andy. How do we move from numbers to stories about kids and impact or lack thereof? The final thing I'll say is that what's so hard in this is that everyone's pretty familiar with their school. They're not familiar with what other people are getting or not getting. And most people are pretty comfortable with what they're getting and don't realize how much better someone else has. And so having them see that, virtual tours, physical tours. We started to do a lot of this in Chicago when we were challenging, very low-performing schools, that there were schools 5 blocks away, same population, same challenges, same everything, radically better results, and parents had no idea. And when they started to visit, then they started to say, yeah, I want that. I want that for my kid. So tell stories, show people comparisons, help them understand the big world out there. Don't stop, though. Don't get discouraged. We need a lot more of that. We need a lot more of that.
Stephanie, and then I see a hand. Can someone get a mic over
Yes,
here?
Stephanie Sanford with the College Board. So I'm struck by, one, sort of the adult drama, lots of complexity, really technical issues. That was part of the critique of No Child Left Behind became so complex.
But that's all stuff you like.
You know, I love that, yeah. But don't generalize from me, please. And so I come to push on the argument you just made, which is there a way to simplify? I mean, if you're going to get parents pounding down the door, if you're going to take on apathy, it's got to be in a way that people understand.
Yeah.
If you were to simplify, you alluded that in Chicago you did the top 3 to 5 things. If you were to simplify to the top 3 to 5 things, you think about the great movements. They usually had 1 or 2 centralizing ideas. What would you do?
Well, that's a great question. I think we have overcomplicated, over-intellectualized this. So let's just take a civil rights movement, right to vote, right to be, right to ride at the front of a bus, gay rights, right to marry. It's sort of, you're getting down to not 3, but 1. So what's the right here? Right to a world-class education. I don't know, that's not, maybe doesn't have quite the emotional appeal, and I'm terrible at branding and marketing, so I'm the wrong guy to ask. But I think it's the right question. I'm not going to answer it well, but how do we really simplify this? And again, take all the politics out of it, because for me, this should be divorced from politics. But I think for me, it's what's at stake with a changed world, how important this is. And for me, the piece that gets missed is how much potential every kid has. And I think large segments of our population write off a lot of kids. They just don't think, because of their skin color or because of their zip code or because of their socioeconomic status, they really don't quite believe in their heart they can be successful. And that's what I've tried to fight every day all my life, because I've seen the opposite every day all my life. And so I think if people truly understood that every kid has this amazing potential, and it's incumbent upon us as adults to unlock it, if they understood what's at stake if this doesn't happen, the cost of academic failure 3 decades ago was much smaller than the cost of academic failure today. And I'm going on too long, so I'm clearly not answering a simple question simply. But you're right, we need to get this to 1 or 2 messages, and then I would argue that appeal more to the heart than to the head.
It's a complicated question, so it's not new.
It's a right question.
Following
It's
up
exactly
with
right
your sort of view when you were in Washington, and you were this was all coming at you, it seems like for all the talk about like an education reform movement, there is no education reform. I mean, the other movements you sort of cited, like gay marriage, there was an organized group of litigators pursuing a very specific strategy. And you can name, you know who these people were. Even the civil rights movement, there was different strategies, but there was a network and people were moving in the same direction. And the education movement, to the extent it does politics, it's episodic, and there's really not sort of any organizing. So is that part of the because what you're sort of asking for, I just don't see in this field. Meanwhile, you do have the same sort of special interest politics that you see on a host of other issues that, as we know in a liberal democracy like this, how that sort of drives things day in, day out.
I think that's right. I've thought, obviously I struggle with this stuff every day. I don't have the answers. The thing that I think ultimately, well, on the gay marriage thing, there was a legal strategy and a lot of that. At the end of the day, everyone in this country knew someone, and almost everyone had a family member who was gay. And so there was a level of personal connection that people, again, folks on the far right, where it may have been, thought it was impossible, they moved because it was their daughter or their son or their niece. And the problem now is we are so disconnected from each other as a country. Lots of people don't know any poor people anymore. They don't know any black people. They don't know any Hispanic people. And their schools are sort of okay, and their gated community is pretty okay. And the gay marriage issue cut through race and class and socioeconomic status, geography, it touched everybody. This issue doesn't touch everybody. I had never been to a Native American reservation before I started this job. Those are some of the most heartbreaking, inspiring, moving visits, but I've lived this all my life, and I didn't know that world. And so the question is, how do we have greater connection amongst folks in an increasingly divided society where we can all have our own media outlets that tell us this, reconfirm everything we already think, where we live in our gated communities, where we spread out. And the lack of common humanity of saying it's not just I want my kids to do well, but I want someone else's kids to do well. That's the part that, in fact, it's in my self-interest to have someone else's kids do well. That's what we're missing.
We have time for one more. So you've been waiting patiently over here.
Do
You have a mic.
one more here.
Thank you. Could you evaluate a race to the top for us? Never mind why it was necessary. If we get started on Congress, we'll never finish. But what were its successes and what were its frustrations?
That's a long last question. I'll try and be brief. We made lots of mistakes. Nothing's ever perfect. At the end of the day, I'm extraordinarily proud of what we did. And again, you think of what were the goals we were trying to get to. There were a number of states that had laws on the books that said it was illegal, it was against the law in the state to link student learning and teacher evaluation. After Race to the Top, there were none of those laws, zero. Many states had reduced academic standards under No Child Left Behind. In part, thanks to Race to the Top incentives, we had 45, 46 states raise standards, college and career-ready standards. We have states starting to think, what's that?
Don't forget the frustration.
Yeah, I'll get there. Looking at data very differently, being clear on that, huge push there. Turning around low-performing schools. There had been a passivity in the nation behind that, and a huge amount of resources went into that. And let me be clear, none of these ideas were brilliant or things that we thought of. This was stuff that a set of education governors, Democrat, Republican, Governor Riley, Governor Clinton at the time, they talked about high standards in the late 90s. Everyone talked about it. No one did anything. No one did anything. In fact, states went in the wrong direction. So thanks to carrots, not sticks, I'm a big believer in carrots, not sticks, you saw a massive move in the right direction. Lots of noise, lots of pushback, but we spend $650 billion K-12 each year, every year. We had $4 billion in Race to the Top over 4 years, 5 years, so we'll call it $1 billion a year. So for like less than 1/3% of national spend, you saw more change in a couple of years than you've seen in the past couple of decades. And so I'll take that every day of the week. In a perfect world, you would go slower in some of these things, but our kids have one chance to get an education. And you can't do this over 8 or 10 or 12 years. Kids don't have that time, and we don't have that time politically. Frustrations. Some frustrations. Honestly, our best hope internally, when we were designing this, our best hope was to get 20 to 25 states to move. That was our wildest hope, was to get half the states to move. The fact that you saw 45, 46 move way exceeded what we thought. Second huge lesson, so carrots not sticks was a lesson. Another huge lesson, I've said this all the time, is that we saw as much movement in states that didn't receive a nickel as states that we gave hundreds of millions of dollars to. And I didn't anticipate that at all. Yes, the money was important. It was really about creating the space and the opportunity, giving people the courage to do what they thought was the right thing. Mistakes, hindsight, clearly the name Common Core was not a brilliant, it should have been the Uncommon Core, the highly unique and very special for every state core. That was a miss. The Buckeye standards, the Illini standards, and you just sort of didn't think that through. You also didn't realize so many folks would move. And again, for me, the goal, I just go back to principles. Principles, tight on goals, loose on means, challenge people to go to the next level. I always think, what's the right, appropriate federal role? That, I think, is the appropriate federal role.
All right, great last question. That does have to be the last word. Arne Duncan, thank you for your candor.
Thank you, guys.